Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. On this episode, we're taking a little trip back in time and visiting an old friend. His name is Bruce. The truck in this video you'll recognize from my title shot and end screen, and it's all over my channel, pictures of it everywhere. One of the nicest trucks I've ever had, for sure. And it's kind of the genesis of what led to me building Vicky back here. Sadly, I don't have the truck anymore. My old house made sure of that. Thanks a lot. Original paint, all original truck. I detailed and painted the entire underneath and rebuilt everything basically mechanically. It had a 400 engine, which was original. I ended up rebuilding it, and it was bored 30 over with stock type pistons, rebuilt Aussie Cleveland heads that I put on there. Had an Edelbrock Performer intake on it, and then later a Hawaiian Stealth. It probably had, you know, about 10-to-1 compression. And it had a Comp Cam's Extreme Energy 262 camshaft, Headman headers, 2.5-inch dual exhaust with an H-pipe, thrush chambered mufflers, which are a knockoff of a Flowmaster 40. The exhaust sounded amazing, which is why some of the clips in here are just the exhaust idling, because it sounded amazing. The truck had full DJM suspension, had DJM Dream Beams in the front, which lower the front about 3 inches. It had a DJM axle flip in the back, which lowers the rear about 5.5 inches. It had torque thrust wheels that I put on it, 17-inch with like 255, 60, 17 tires. I can't remember what the sidewall height was, but anyway, he is now in the sunny, greener pastures of California. I hope he enjoys it there. I hope they haven't taken away his freedoms and told him to tone it down. So anyway, let's get into it. Here's the video. So last winter, after Bruce was parked for the winter, the first time I drove it, back brakes would lock up real easy, and kind of got a little better as you drive it, but it's time to dig into it and see what's going on. So take off my beautiful 17 by 8 inch torque thrust originals and see what's going on. Possibly slave cylinders leaking, I'm hoping, because the rear end is pretty fresh. It only has about 1,000 miles on it, and I'm going to be more than a little irritated if it's the axle seals leaking. So let's find out. You also notice tailpipes, which were not there before. See it pop? Get rusted and stuck to the hub there from being heat cycled. Yum. Brake dust. Junkyard axles, because somebody had done rear wheel bearings on this before I got it, and they gave it the torch treatment and torched into the axle, but went ahead and pressed new bearings on it anyway. So when I was rebuilding the rear end, found that, and got some junkyard axles and put new bearings and collars and seals on them the correct way. A little tip for that is take a cutoff wheel and cut about 90% of the way through that retainer collar, and then take an air chisel or a hammer and a chisel, stick it in that groove you cut and pound it until that retainer cracks, and then it'll slide right off. So what you're looking for, this is the wheel cylinder right here. Your hydraulic brake pressure comes in the back. This is a little slave cylinder. Basically there's a cup here and a cup here. It's all sealed up. Brake fluid comes in, pushes both of those cups out, which push the top of the brake shoes out, and that's what activates the brakes. Looking for fluid dribbling. Oh, you know what? That felt a little bit wet right there. Yep. There is a little wetness here on this one. Oh yeah. Yahtzee. That's even dripping. So, there you be. Sometimes you gotta pop them off. And if you don't see any wetness or anything coming out right there where the little piston or the little arm comes out, pop it back. And if there's nothing leaking at all, you can just go ahead and pop it back on. So, looks like Bruce needs some new wheel cylinders. No big deal. And we'll do that. You don't even have to take the brakes all the way apart to do those. Pretty easy. And the flex hose there in the rear is original, so I think we'll go ahead and replace that too while we're in here, because we're gonna have to bleed the brakes anyway. But there's a brake fluid leak. Let's see what the other. Oh, yeah, that side's wet too. And these are from the parts store. Those are probably 10 bucks, if that. So it's a pretty cheap fix. Well, the passenger side doesn't really appear to be leaking much, but there is, let's see, it's a little greasy down there on the spring, if you can see the spring for the e-brake cable. So we'll go ahead and do both sides anyway. Okay, so this is a fairly simple job. We're not going to take the brake shoes all the way off and all the springs and everything because they're fairly new. We don't need to. Brake spring tool will make your life a lot easier. This end's for putting springs on, this end's for taking them off. So if you've never used one before, that's the anchor pin. That end goes on it, and you turn it, and then pivot. Pretty easy. Other side. Okay. And then that is to move the adjuster. I've got an offset 1/2 inch and 7/16 wrench for the bolts that hold the wheel cylinder in there. And then I've just got I should have a fitting wrench, but I couldn't find one, but I've got a 7/16 wrench for the brake line that goes into the back of the wheel cylinder. Something tells me that's not going to be too easy to get back on. So I'm just taking the springs off so that I can spread these apart. See, now I've got room to get the wheel cylinder in and out. I'll put it all back together, and then I'll clean everything and I'll lube the backing plate where they slide also. I usually break the fitting loose, and then I take my wrench and I'll take the 2 retaining bolts out. Now the reason the brake shoes were grabbing too hard is because they're contaminated with brake fluid. So you need to look at them and figure out what you're going to do. If they're bad enough, you're going to go ahead and replace them. If it hasn't been going on too long, and these don't look too bad at all, you're still going to clean them. And if they're fairly bad, what you can do also is you can actually lightly sand them to kind of take the top layer off if they get the friction material kind of like balled up on there in little clumps. That'll happen if it's been leaking for quite a long time. But really, if they're that bad, you should just replace them. But I did these brakes just a couple years ago. They don't have a ton of miles on them, so we'll just clean them up. Okay, you can see these dust covers are still popped loose from when I checked the wheel cylinder to see if it was leaking. Oh, that guy actually just popped out of there. So that's what's in there. Just a little piston, kind of looks like a U-joint cap a little bit. Ooh, Yahtzee. Gotta get that off of there. These little fingers, arms, whatever you want to call them, you need to reuse. So we're just gonna make sure this old wheel cylinder matches the new, and we'll slam the new one in there. Just making sure the bolt holes are the correct size. And I just cleaned off the little pins with a little bit of brake clean and wiped them off with a rag. They're gonna go in here in the new dust seals. We'll just grab the old wheel cylinder real quick to make sure it looks the same. So we'll go ahead and put these guys in. And then the first thing that we're going to get started on it is the brake line, because you want to get it started good and not cross-threaded, and get it going in there pretty good, and then we'll start the bolts. Because you do need to kind of, it's a hard line coming in, so you need to wiggle and jiggle it a little bit. Never hurts to see what size that is. It's probably a 10 mil. A lot of the bleeders that come with them have a metric head on them, just so you know before you try sticking a standard wrench on there. It fits tight in a recess in the backing plate, so you got to get it in there just so. We'll get our bolts going in there. I know it sounds like somebody's taking a leak in the background, but I promise it's snow melt. Alright, so now that's all tight, we need to get our shoes moved back up onto these pins and then hook all of our springs back up. So there's a lip on the backing plate that they kind of fall over, and they're held on by a spring, so you got to kind of pull them away, get this finagled in that groove. There we go. There we go. So that's right where that needs to live. And then the other side, and then we'll get the springs on. Okay, so I got that spring on there. Never hurts. This is one of the things that the old guys showed me back in the day. Just give it a little squeeze, a little tighter so it doesn't pop off. And then this guy. I mean, you can do this with pliers and a screwdriver, but that's a good way to lose an eyeball or a digit. Needs to go on just a little bit more. There we go. And I'll give that one just a little squeeze. Squeeze her closed just a little. Okay. That is all in there. Looks good. Alright, now all that's left to do with this is bleed it and clean it. So, hose it down with some brake clean. I just kind of wet it all down first so that it's not blowing a bunch of this crap into my lungs. Kind of get it all wet. And you can really see in there. Just cleaning all the brake dust and residue and crud out of there. Need to clean the shoes really good. Get all that brake residue out of there. And if you do this and the first couple times you hit the brakes they're still a little grabby, don't worry about it. If you fix the issue and there's still a little bit of residue, some heat cycles on the brakes will kind of bake it out of there. So if you find yourself bleeding brakes by yourself, here's what you can do. The bleeder is just cracked, loose, just barely. I've got a clear plastic hose on it that came with my Mighty Vac hand vacuum pump, which has seen better days, obviously. You hook it to the other side of the little container, hose goes up there. Now normally when you're bleeding you want no more air bubbles when you're having somebody pump it. This is also nice because it doesn't get brake fluid all over the place. You can see I'm gonna have to touch up the paint a little there on the axle tube because it got brake fluid on it, which eats paint. But doing it this way you will always have a little bit of bubbles coming out, so I usually just go through about full container of that to bleed the back brakes. Keep topping off the reservoir up front. You'll always have a little bit of air because the way this draws air, it'll suck air around the bleeder threads, and also if it's not a very good seal. This hose is all hard, so it doesn't quite make a perfect seal and it ends up drawing in a little bit of air.